Hello.
Hello.
Oh, there you are. I lost you for a moment there.
I lost you.
Hmm.
What's the last thing you heard?
Nothing. I was just talking about...
What
was talking. What was the last thing you heard? This episode of Trifles is made possible by listeners like you who support us on Patreon and Substack. To learn more, go to patreon.com/trifles or trifles.substack.com.
Welcome to Trifles, a weekly podcast about the Sherlock Holmes stories.
It is, of course, a trifle, but there is nothing so important as trifles.
Yes, the Greek interpreter interpreted, the Norwood builder built, and the Reigate squires puzzled, but there are so many other details to pick apart in the stories.
Pray, be precise as to details.
How many disguises did Sherlock Holmes use? What were the street Arabs? And how did he get information from his underground network?
You are very inquisitive, Mr. Holmes.
It is my business to know what other people don't know.
Scott Monty and Burt Wolder will have the answers to these questions and more in Trifles.
The game's afoot.
Episode 389, Years of Mystery. Hello and welcome to Trifles, the Sherlock Holmes podcast where we get into the details of the Sherlock Holmes stories. I'm Scott Monty.
I'm Burt Wolder.
And Burt, are you ready for some minutes of mystery?
Oh, I'm ready for whole sections, hours, weeks, days, clouds of mystery. Oh, no, that's a Dorothy Sayers story.
Well, that's actually part of the outtakes from this episode. We had a little bit of a technical glitch there that left us both befuddled and bemused. And,
that's a win for me.
It's a win every time, but I don't think people want to listen to, a few minutes of you and I saying hello, and then silence. I think what we'll do is we will cobble that together with some other outtakes from other episodes, and I think it's about time for a bonus episode. So
I think so too.
Yeah. It'll be fun, frustrating, cringy, and risible. How's that?
Well, it's a pretty good... Isn't that a law firm? I thought that was a law firm in San Francisco.
I would love to be their client.
Do you know, years ago, S.J. Perelman wrote a lovely little... one of his little comedy essays. I don't remember what it was about, but in there he talks about a private detective agency named Shirley, Goodness, and Mercy. And their slogan was, "We follow you all the days of your life."
Oh, that's nice.
Isn't that cute?
I would definitely engage them. Well, let's engage our audience instead. We have another episode in our travel series here where we follow our nose wherever the particular piece of scholarship takes us. And in this case, we're going to get down to the Sussex Downs. We're going to get over to the United States. And it's a critical time in the Sherlock Holmes chronology, so it should be quite interesting. If you'd like to support the show, you can do that either on Substack or Patreon. You pick whichever works for you. For as little as $1 a month, you can show everybody that you are part of the community here. And doing so gives you access to content that no one else can see. It also gives you the opportunity to receive thank you gifts on Patreon. And for all of our subscribers, you get a chance to see your name put in for a drawing every month. Doesn't matter what level you're supporting us at, every supporter is eligible to potentially win a back issue of the Baker Street Journal, one of the great tomes of Sherlockian scholarship from over the years, from 1946 to the present. We have a variety of back issues that we want to share with you. So go ahead and check us out at patreon.com/trifles or trifles.substack.com. Okay, well, we find ourselves immersed in years of mystery, a speculation. Now, who exactly is doing this speculating, Bert?
Oh, it's Les Klinger. Les is a terrific Sherlockian scholar editor of the annotated Sherlock Holmes, the Sherlock Holmes Reference Library, and much more. His essays collected in a variety of places, but one is a book from 2008 called Baker Street Rambles. And it's in that book that Years of Mystery, a speculation appears. And it is the second part, really, of a two-part essay, the first part of which appeared in the Baker Street Journal in 1998, asking, was Maurice Costello the first screen Sherlock Holmes? And we're not going to go into the details of the first appearance of Sherlock Holmes on the screen, but it's safe to say that that part of Les's essay ends with not proven. You know, there's just a lot of uncertainty about Maurice Costello's appearance there. So what Les has done is follows that by saying, okay, well, 1905, which is when The Adventures of Sherlock Holmes, supposedly with Maurice Costello, filmed in Brooklyn, New York, appeared. He says 1905 was a year, oh boy, a lot was changing. Turmoil in Tsarist Russia, the Russo-Japanese War comes to an end. Henry Irving dies. So did Jules Verne. Albert Einstein formulated his special theory of relativity. What a year. Where was Sherlock Holmes? Between 1903, when he was involved in the matters of the Blanched Soldier, the Mazarin Stone, the Creeping Man, and probably the Three Gables, and 1907, when he himself recorded The Lion's Mane, nothing is known of his activities. Now, we should point out that subsequently, chronologists, I believe including Les, have favored 1909 rather than 1907 for the events of Lion's Mane. But in Lion's Mane, Holmes notes that the adventure occurred after he withdrew to his Sussex home. And there's no specific indication in that of how long Holmes had been in Sussex, but it was apparently long enough so that in July of 1907, several neighbors knew Holmes by sight. And as to Harold Stackhurst, Holmes writes, he and I were always friendly from the day I came to the coast. So Holmes, says Les, had probably been in Sussex for a few years, but probably not continuously since 1903. And so the question remains, where was Holmes between 1903 and 1907? And that's how we get into these odd American details that link Sherlock Holmes to a strange series of events in America.
Yeah, and here I think we're going to come back to Holmes's association with some of the great police constables and detectives over on this side of the pond. In a section called Crime in America, Les tells us about Mrs. Leroy Chadwick, or Cassie, to her friends. In the 1890s, traveled from Cleveland to New York City, and she took a suite at the Holland House and bumped into a lawyer from Cleveland named Dillon and asked him to drive her to the residence of Andrew Carnegie. Now, this is the steel magnate.
Andrew Carnegie.
Yeah. He was America's richest bachelor at the time. And when she returned to the cab, after about 20 minutes back to her lawyer, she dropped a paper which Dillon retrieved and noticed it was a promissory note for $2 million signed by Carnegie. And Cassie told him that she was Carnegie's illegitimate daughter and that Carnegie doted on her, had previously given her $7 million in securities. And so when the lawyer went back to Cleveland, the rumors started about Cassie. And when she returned herself, the city was abuzz, and he arranged for her to deposit the quote-unquote securities in a safety deposit box. And then she found herself the object of attraction by many banks and businessmen. So right here, it's almost the makings of a modern-day soap opera. I've heard this story before about Cassie Chadwick and this involvement with Andrew Carnegie, but haven't really considered where it might intersect with Sherlock Holmes.
Or how far it goes back. It's interesting. We do occasionally find these stories of people who present themselves as having relationships with fabulously rich people. I was just discussing this last night with my uncle Jeff Bezos. But anyway, Les's point here is that what happens is Carnegie, when his reputation becomes questioned because of the claims of this woman, turns to Wilson Hargreave of the New York Police for assistance.
Oh, we've heard of him before.
We've heard of him. And Hargreave, now this, I should point out, this is sort of the weak point in Les's argument here. Hargreave immediately telegraphed Sherlock Holmes at his Sussex home and begged him to come to New York to help Carnegie. Well, now, is Hargreaves, such an incompetent fellow that he couldn't handle Cassie? Well, all right. So skipping over that, Wilson Hargreave telegraphs to Sherlock Holmes, and he refuses because he's not interested. But then he got another plea for help from the father of a young woman on trial for murder, and so Holmes decides to sail to America.
Aha. And this individual is Nan Patterson. She's the daughter of the supervising architect of the U.S. Treasury. And Les tells us she was a Florodora girl. Do you know what a Florodora girl was, Bert?
Well, yeah, I think Florodora was the name of a review, an early review by Flo Ziegfeld. But if it wasn't by Flo Ziegfeld, it was, I'm pretty sure it was the name of a New York review, which basically featured a series of musical acts, some tied together by some loose story, and lots of dancers and lots of women in scanty costumes.
Essentially correct. It was an Edwardian musical comedy, started in the West End in London.
Oh, it did? London, did it?
Yeah,
Oh.
made its way over to Broadway. I think it started in 1899, so it would have been concurrent with the play Sherlock Holmes, starring William Gillette. Made its way over to Broadway in 1900 and had multiple revivals between 1902 and 1920. Music by Leslie Stewart and Paul Rubens, and lyrics by Paul Rubens and Edward Boyd Jones.
Interesting. Florodora girl. Well, Nan, who was a Florodora girl, so I gather that means that she was actually in the show.
I would imagine so, yeah.
So the story here is that while she's in this show, she falls in love with a fellow named Caesar Young, an Englishman, who had already been married for 10 years and who divides his time between his wife and Nan, his mistress. And what happens is they are now in America. And in mid-1904, Young picks up Nan early in the morning, and they begin bar hopping, as of course everyone would do in New York at early 1904. And they get into a hansom cab on their way bound for the pier. And about halfway to the pier, there's an explosion heard in the cab, and Caesar is lying across Nan's lap, dying of a bullet wound in the chest. And his gun is found in his pocket, and Nan says, well, he shot himself in agony over leaving me.
Interesting.
And he was so upset, of course, that he replaced his gun carefully in his pocket. Yeah, he put it back in his pocket.
He was very distraught over his gun being found in his hand, so he put it back in his pocket.
He was also neat.
Okay, yeah. Love that.
What a tragedy. Well, Holmes apparently agrees to help Nan's father. Now, I know, friends, listeners, you're wondering, what has this got to do with Maurice Costello? And was Maurice Costello related to Lou Costello? Well, we're not going to tell you that, but we are going to tie this up in just a minute. Give us a break for another minute here. So what happens is, and remember, this is Les's story, not mine. But it's really worth following here. So, despite the peculiar story that Nan tells, Holmes helps Nan's father defend his daughter because her story is so unlikely and feeble that Holmes believes it could only be the truth. Oh, I don't know about that. But anyway, the prosecution is relentless. She has 2 trials. The juries are split. And in 1905, the state finally gives up, and she gets out of jail. So apparently she goes free. But what happens here is that Holmes is in New York. He's talking to Wilson Hargreave. He agrees to advise Carnegie because he was there investigating the Nan Patterson case. He understands that Cassie can't repay her debts. Cassie eventually goes to the Slammer, where she dies in 1907. However, Holmes lingers in New York at Carnegie's mansion to enjoy his library. And while Holmes doesn't receive any payment from Carnegie for his work, he is happy when Carnegie establishes the Carnegie Foundation for the Advancement of Teaching in 1905. Well, 1905. J. Stuart Blackton, here's the payoff, gang, decides to make a film about Sherlock Holmes. But there's Sherlock Holmes in New York at Andrew Carnegie's mansion. Interested in the new science of motion pictures, Holmes agrees to be interviewed by J. Stuart Blackton, and the interview took place in Brooklyn. Okay.
And that's where Blackton convinced Holmes that if he's going to produce a documentary, and an entertaining one at that, well, what about Holmes demonstrating some of his techniques of the whole art of detection? Well, little did Sherlock Holmes know that after he returned to England, Blackton would then edit and sell this quote-unquote documentary to Vitagraph as an entertainment, and calling it Adventures of Sherlock Holmes. So what was going to be kind of a filmed monograph ended up being turned into a pure entertainment piece of media.
Yeah, so there you are. So we already know that Maurice Costello was probably not the first screen Sherlock Holmes. And while it's not completely proven, Les Klinger, 26 years ago, adopted the position that the first screen appearance of Sherlock Holmes was by Sherlock Holmes.
Well, let's just pause a moment here and reflect on this fantasy. I mean, it's very creative. I have to give Les credit for weaving together the Sherlockian timeline and the, lurid legal and entertainment timelines of America. But do we really think that Holmes, after having concluded an investigation, and I can't imagine he would have been that involved in a trial. I mean, he would have done his work up front and let the lawyers handle the trial work after. But do we really think that after that was done, he would just lounge about at Andrew Carnegie's mansion and simply while away the time looking at the books in his library?
Yeah.
Seems highly unlikely to me.
The mansion of a great industrialist with whom Holmes had no relationship,
right,
and did really no work at all.
And we already saw Holmes's disdain for the upper class numerous times, whether it was J. Neil Gibson or the Duke of Holderness or any of the upper class of society that he dealt with. He really did not hold them in high regard, particularly not enough to just hang with them in his leisure time.
Well, that's true. It would have been a nice alternative. I mean, if Florodora was on the stage in Broadway when Holmes was there, and he'd seen it a couple of times, it would have been a nice break to just explore Carnegie's library instead of going back for the 5th or 6th time.
Well, it was going on in 1905. There was a revival, so.
Well, there you are. Well, that's proof. I think that's
a story for which the world is not yet prepared.
What more evidence do you need?
Well, I would say I need just a trifle more.
It is, of course, a trifle, but there is nothing so important as trifles.
Please join us again next week for another installment of Trifles. Show notes are available on SherlockHolmesPodcast.com. Please subscribe to us on Apple Podcasts and be sure to check out our longer show, I Hear of Sherlock Everywhere, where we interview notable Sherlockians and share news of the Sherlockian world.
You've taken my breath away, Mr. Holmes.
What will you entitle this particular account?
I didn't know you were interested in my writing.
I am always interested in your choice of titles.
Well, I thought I'd call it the Brook Street Mystery. No?
Well, I myself would prefer The Resident Patient. But please do not let me influence you. The Brook Street Mystery. No doubt would suffice.